Welcome to The Wing, the emotional and financial health check you never knew you needed.
Hello, ladies. Welcome to another episode of The Wing. Today, we have a very special guest, Iveta Bales. Iveta and I went to primary school together. She was a couple of years ahead of me, but we have known each other for a very, very, very long time and seen each other go through the transition into motherhood and life and relationships and career and all sorts of things. And Iveta's younger sister, Mara, is one of my best friends. So I want to welcome Iveta. Hi, Iveta.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us today. To give Iveta a little bit of an intro, so Iveta has worked in the space of relationships for over a decade. Her work has focused on helping people navigate separation and divorce, working as a lawyer and mediator. She also specializes in supporting conversations about finances and intergenerational wealth. So think sort of prenups and inheritances. She's got 2 kids of her own who are now 8 and 10, which I cannot believe because I remember when they were born.
It's wild. Uh-huh.
And I remember when you were pregnant with them, actually.
I know. So do I. It feels like not that long ago. And then I look at them and I'm like, oh, you're almost as tall as me. It was that long ago.
Well, that's it. It was literally a decade ago. It's just
Literally.
wild.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously Iveta is out of the early years and the baby fog, but she's transitioning into the parenting tweens and teenagers phase. So it's a whole different barrel of fish, I imagine.
Wish me luck.
Yeah, I do wish you luck.
With that tween stage, so my daughter's 10 or 10 and a half, I have really strong core memories of being that age. And again, that doesn't feel like that long ago. Like you knew me back then when I was like end of primary school and just often thinking, oh my gosh, you're like, I remember what I was doing then. So you're going to remember all of this now. And like, I wonder what you're thinking.
Absolutely. And every little memory and every day that you create for her and her little brother is just so critical. I mean, it's a lot of pressure, isn't it, to think, wow, that they're going to have these memories when they're our age.
Yeah. And I think it's wild that one of the biggest things that we will ever do, like in parenting, is that we don't learn it at school.
No.
You know, we in our health classes maybe get told like have safe sex so you don't get pregnant, but like that's it. You know, I've spent a lot of time, I think because I work in the space of separation and divorce, and so I've seen a lot of parents navigating co-parenting, also like their kids going through transitions and struggles. I've tried to upskill myself in that space of parenting and childhood development. And to be honest, the more I learn, the more I'm like, I don't know anything.
Oh, and does anyone? Like, I mean, it's all what we're exposed to and what type of kids we have and how they change and develop over time, because as they are at 2 is not as they are at 10, I imagine.
No, not at all. Yeah, totally different developmental stages. Yeah.
It's a huge topic, and I have just had these burning questions for a legal professional for such a long time, well beyond I even thought about a podcast. So I'm really excited to get into some facts, you know, rather than, you know, and I've seen a lot of friends go through transitions in life, relationships, family situations, kids or no kids, navigating money and how we deal with it and how we talk about it, how we navigate conflict in all of those topics. So I think hearing from you, Iveta, is going to be extremely valuable for our listeners who may be going through, maybe they're just starting a relationship with a partner and they might already have some assets that they need to protect. Marriage is still years away in their mind, or on the other end of it, where they've been married and perhaps they're going the other way and they're separating or divorcing, or, you know, they're not married and they've got kids, and what happens during a separation in that kind of situation. So we'll go through sort of step by step. But first of all, so talking about just to kind of frame the conversation. So family law general practice, what does that service cover, and when would someone think about engaging a professional in your field
Yeah.
situations that are maybe not commonly spoken about or the topics spoken about in general?
Look, I think family law is a very broad category. You know, it can include things to do with adoption and surrogacy, as well as, you know, separation and divorce. The times that people often kind of dip into the family law system is when they're going through a breakup. And it's interesting because it's not usually the first breakup that they've gone through. You know, we have high school breakups and so we have our first heartbreaks. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I can almost still feel my first heartbreak. Like
Absolutely. Yep.
they cut deep. But because we're younger or we might not have as many assets or we might not have kids, that's all that they are, even though they are huge. You know, it's a breakup and then, you know, you grieve and life moves on and the legal system has nothing to say or do with it. It's when people have been in a relationship for a significant time where they might have accrued wealth together or they're just financially intertwined or they have kids together, that's when you see kind of the family law system come in, and that's when people are starting to look to, I need some family law advice. I want to know what my rights and entitlements are. If I put my lawyer hat on, I say, like, you should go and see a lawyer for advice, like as soon as you're even thinking about separating. But I also know that as lawyers, we are trained to be risk adverse and to tell people how scary it is and how things can go wrong. And so oftentimes people can leave meetings and just be thinking, oh my gosh, like this is terrifying.
That's so interesting. So someone will come to you and explain that they're going through a situation that they potentially want to get out of, and
Mm-hmm.
then it's your role as a legal professional to warn them and tell them about all of the risk, and then they might actually leave that meeting thinking, oh my gosh, this is too
Yeah.
overwhelming and maybe it's not
Mhm.
that bad and maybe we should just leave things as they are.
Or, yes, that, or they leave that meeting with a sense of, I've got to go in swinging because if I don't, then I'm going to have like the underhand. And you see situations go from, like, it's not low conflict because if you're in that space of talking about separation, there's, you know, probably poor communication and some level of conflict, but it just escalates. So I think a good family lawyer won't leave you with that feeling. They'll empower you to understand the risks, but also empower you to own your life, own your decision, and know that you're the best person to make the decision that's right for you, even if it might be going, you know, going against legal advice. So that's kind of like, if I put my lawyer hat on, that's how, like, it's like, here are all the risks. And so you should know as soon as possible, you know, what you're in for. But the way that I usually practice more is sitting in that empowerment place. Like, oftentimes couples counseling is where that couple need to be. Even if one person is like, I'm done, I don't want to stay in this relationship, but using it as a space to have hard conversations. And sometimes it might tip from, you know, couples counseling to mediation. But again, still sitting in that space of, we've got to talk about some really hard stuff. And clearly we can't do it, just us. Because if we could, we probably wouldn't be separating.
Yeah.
So what support do we need? And how are we going to be held accountable to try and bring our best selves to those conversations?
And if a couple, so then they say, okay, all right, let's give the counselling a go. Can you go into a bit more detail on the difference between the couples counselling and the mediation and who looks after
Yeah.
what?
Yeah, so couples counseling would be working with a therapist, so someone who's therapeutically trained. So I don't have a therapeutic background. So I look at that work and I think it's brilliant. You know, we're looking at psychotherapists, couples counselors, maybe psychologists that do couples therapy. So they're really trying to tap into, what dynamics do you guys have going on? What blueprints do the two of you bring to the table? Like, what's coming up for both of you? And how do we see a way forward? or have those conversations. Oftentimes, those therapists, if it's quite clear that the couple are separating, and then they need to have conversations about, okay, well, what are we going to do with our finances, or how are we going to co-parent together? Oftentimes therapists say, oh, this is like, I'm out of my area now, like not my section, go and see a lawyer. But what I actually think is a nice bookend to working with a therapist is then mediation. So mediators then will sit with the couple. Sometimes they're therapeutically trained, not always. Sometimes they're legally trained, but not always. So for example, I work as a mediator, and I would then sit with that couple or separating couple and say, okay, what do you need to sort out? What conversations need to be had? But it's with a very kind of future focused framework. We're not spinning in the past as much. The past certainly informs the present and the future, but we're looking to solutions. Okay, bring the grievance, then identify a possible solution. So I guess that's the difference between like the couples therapy and then the mediation, really.
That is a great point and an excellent summary. So yeah, so you've got the counseling, the couples counseling is to kind of trudge up that past and let's talk about the stuff, the ugly stuff.
Yeah.
And like you said, learn more about one another's blueprints and where those thoughts and feelings are coming from and where the breakdown in communication might be. But then the mediation side of things is very much take that into account, but plan forward and what are we actually going to do as a solution, whether that is to actually separate and then divorce, or if that is to stay together and figure out what that looks like. Is there many situations where the couple might actually go through those steps and then get to mediation and it is actually that they end up staying together? Like, what would you say is more common, that they end up ultimately separating or staying together?
I think all I can speak about is like my own practice and the clients that I've worked with. I've had many clients say to me, we wish we'd done something like this, like mediation, long ago, because we probably wouldn't be separated if we had. So that real, what's the issue? What's some possible solutions? Go away and do it. But sadly, those couples have also said to me, like, but it's too late now. Like if we'd had someone like you or had a process like what we're doing now, like mediation earlier, we probably wouldn't be here, but it's too far gone now. I think for those with kids, that's still a really positive place for them to be in because they're co-parenting for the rest of their lives. They remain the parents of these children. It's that kind of positive base that we want to make sure people still have because it impacts their kids.
Absolutely. And that's a bit sad, isn't it? It is sort of like, but that's the purpose of this exact conversation is to, maybe, like fast track these conversations and these solutions and that can happen with professionals before it's too late. And that's, before or after kids, whichever position someone is in.
Yeah.
But if there are, how many relationships could actually be saved if these chats were happening sooner? That's a really, really good point.
And I think a lot of this, when I was listening to your Unrelenting Standards episode, so for any of your listeners who haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it. It was really a beautiful example of the things that you're doing to work on yourself, because ultimately that's all we have control over is us, but doing our work so that we are then turning up to our relationships, whether they be with our spouses or with our friends or with our families, in an aware way and in an intentional way. And I think I feel really lucky having kind of found myself in this line of work because it has changed the way that I turn up to relationships, in particular, like with my partner. I cringe when I think back to the kind of girlfriend I was with my first boyfriend. And I just, I think I've done that poor guy some psychological damage.
I can completely relate, like we were talking about early breakups when you're, an impressionable teenage girl in your early 20s, and
Yeah.
you're in these relationships that are your whole world at the time. I'm the
Yeah.
same. I look back and I cringe, and like friends of mine will occasionally, oh, remember when you did that to so and so? I'm like, oh my God, stop telling me.
Yeah, don't talk about it. Don't talk about it.
Like, I hate that other
Because I
people
think
remember.
and I think particularly when you're in that kind of first relationship space, so you usually late high school, maybe just finished high school, early 20s, that's your first go at an intimate relationship. I don't think we appreciate how much we operate on autopilot, and we just go to our blueprint and we don't have any awareness of our blueprint. And it means then we can turn up to relationships in ways that we don't necessarily want to.
Exactly. And it's, again, like I said earlier, these are not things we learn in school. We don't learn how to be parents at school. We don't learn how to be girlfriends and boyfriends at school. We do, but not, the teachers don't teach you that. You have to learn at the hard way. And you're at such an impressionable age where, you want to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and you want to fit in, you want to start that journey, or, you might even be thinking about marriage and kids at that early phase. I think one of the things that stood out to me, and don't quote me on this scientific reference, but to do with our frontal lobes. So I think for women, it's our decision making. Oh, I'm sorry, frontal lobe is where you make your decisions, and it's actually not fully developed as a female until 25. And I think for men, it's till they're 27 or 28 even.
Later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, well, my eldest is just over 2 years old, so I've got a lot of time to think about this. But will my advice be to her, don't make any major like life relationship decisions until you're at least 25. Like, there's no rush to, like, obviously, go along that path and go along those patterns. But, and I've seen it with so many friends as well. It seems to be that 25, that magic number, and then the biggest relationships ever just completely fall off a cliff. That's when mine fell off a cliff. And, I look back in hindsight and I think, like, if I had have had that information earlier, I maybe wouldn't have changed the way I went about things. Maybe it would have, but it's just, in those early years, you're 18, you're legal to drink and drive, not at the same time, obviously, but you're a legal adult. But really, it's many, many years after that you are an actual adult where you can have the ability to make informed, mature decisions. And
I think the wild thing there is that, like, physiologically, though, that's when our bodies are primed as women to have babies.
Which is
so this real disconnect, right? Like, my body wants to do this thing, and my, like, social maturity, financial maturity probably as well, is like, it is not there yet. And I think maybe that works way back when you're all living in kind of really communal societies. And so if you have a baby at that kind of age where your body is like, we're ready to go, a lot of those other responsibilities are taken care of by the community.
That's it.
Or that family unit. But these days we live so individually and individualistic, and there's such a mismatch. And I think we probably get to our, for some of your listeners, you probably can't even imagine being in your mid-30s, but I've just turned 37, and I'm like, I think maybe now, like, I'm almost an adult. I think I could be a little bit grown up,
I know. I recently turned 34, and I thought, oh, all right, I think this is tracking. Like, this is okay. We're on the road to adulthood now. Like, before that, it's sort of like, early 30s and or late 20s, and it's just not as serious. To get married and have kids and do things, and but it's interesting.
But you still feel a bit out of your depth. You're like, I'm doing this adult stuff, but I don't think I'm really an adult yet.
Absolutely. And I don't know about you, Iveta, but I still lean on my parents for varying, things of advice, or bounce things off them. And I think, wow, how do they feel? They're in their mid-60s and they're talking to their 34-year-old daughter that really should have this worked out by now.
I think your parents would love that.
Probably. They do like to be needed.
I know that mine do. They love when I bring them problems.
They're like, oh, something to do. How can we help?
Yeah.
Totally. No, it's a Yeah, well covered and well said. That information is truly valuable. I think probably leads on to going to that next stage,
Mm.
which is bringing together people like in a couple, but then also bringing
Mhm.
together their assets. So I'll give a live example. So I've got a couple of
Mhm.
friends that have independently of any relationship been quite successful. So they've
Mhm.
purchased property, they've started businesses, they've run businesses, they've built up some financial wealth, and they've done that,
Mhm.
as I said, exclusively not in a relationship. So, but then
Mhm.
they've gotten into relationships with a partner that may be in a similar situation, maybe even not in a similar situation. They might, there's been, I know one friend in particular, she's had boyfriends that haven't actually been as successful as she has, but they're coming together in this relationship. And I always wondered to myself, what happens if they've been together for a certain amount of time, whether they become de facto or whatever it is, how would my friend then protect her things? Like, she didn't want to get married. I don't know that she'll ever get
Mhm.
married because it's just not something on her priority list. But,
Mhm.
how is she going to protect? Like, is there such thing as like a prenuptial agreement without the nuptials?
Yeah, definitely there is. So in Australia, you can have a prenup if you're in a de facto relationship or if you're married. It's like at any point in time. So you can have been together in a de facto relationship for 10 years and then decide, okay, now actually it's really important for me to have a conversation about, money and what I bring to the table, or what you've brought to the table, or actually what I've seen a lot of is young couples in today's cost of living needing mum or dad or grandparents to help them out financially. And so it's money coming into their pool from outside, and it's like, okay, well, how does that get treated? Or usually the gift giver or the lender kind of wanting some reassurance of, well, this stays with you,
Yeah.
So yeah, prenups is the answer. And I think it can be quite taboo, or people can just be really nervous to raise it as a topic of conversation. But I think we need to normalize it, because it's when people sit in silence and then they make their own assumptions that it ends up not playing out the way that they thought it would, and having really sad kind of high conflict outcomes.
Exactly. With or without kids, it is still a relationship
Mm.
breakdown, and it's still got financial elements to it.
I mean, and that the distinction between de facto and marriage is really interesting, because with marriage, it's like socially, it's a really clear, definitive, like, we're doing this, we're choosing this. Whereas de facto isn't. I've had clients be quite upset when I've told them, like, I'm really sorry, but the Family Law Act applies to your circumstances because you're in a de facto relationship. And that's not what they wanted. They've said, no, I want to keep my independence. We haven't mixed our finances, or, we're not married. In Australia, at least, there is a big category of relationships that are still treated as if you were married without that intentional kind of signifier.
What is the definition of de facto? Is it that you've lived together for a certain amount of time, or like what classifies a de facto couple?
Yeah, good question. If I pull up the Family Law Act, I could pull out the section. I should know it off the top of my head, but I don't. Really, we're looking at whether you're living together on a genuine domestic basis.
Right.
And there can be a time element there. So oftentimes if you've been living together for 2 years or more. But interestingly, if you have a child with someone and you're living together, then you automatically become de facto. It's a complex area of the law, because a lot of people, like I just described, they're upset that the law says that they are in a de facto relationship. So there's a lot of case law out there where people are kind of arguing for it to be that they're not in a de facto relationship. And of course, the other person on the other side of that is saying, no, we absolutely were. So yeah, a lot of things go into it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. I can imagine it being quite complex and very much case by case basis. And I suppose, being able to have transparent conversations early is probably, again,
Mm.
same
Mhm.
message, be like, ladies, be thinking about this before, don't let a relationship sort of interfere with the wealth you've built or the assets that you've invested in, or that, if
Mhm.
there's access to inheritance or potential
Mhm.
future inheritance, there are ways to, if it is in your mind that these things are things that need to
Mhm.
be protected at some point, then be aware of the resources available to you through family
Mhm.
lawyers that
Mhm.
can help you have the information and facilitate clear and kind conversations with your new partner, so that,
Mhm.
you can be chatting about that in the early phases. Obviously, we don't want to put a dampener on date night, but, you know,
Well, what I say to people as well is like, if you're talking about prenups, like, just remind each other at the end of the conversation that I do love you and I do want to be in a relationship with you, because it can be really hard and confusing to be talking about separation and for your mind not to then go to, hang on, are we separating? Is that what we're doing right now? And it's like, no, 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 no. So don't do it late at night, because you'll then each think about it at 4 a.m. and like do something nice together after you've had some of those conversations about money. And, if we were to separate, what would this look like? What are you assuming would happen? What am I assuming would happen? And I guess back to your question before, right at the start, you say, well, when would you see a family lawyer? That's probably one thing there, that if you do have wealth, or even actually, I would just say anybody, to have a basic level of understanding of how the law works when couples separate, at least then means that you can go into a relationship eyes wide open, and you can make certain decisions with the knowledge of what it could mean for you down the track. A lot of the time, people have assumptions as to what the law says, and it can be quite confronting when they're told that's not how it works. And you see this kind of look of devastation on their face, and like, well, if I'd known that, I would have never done that, or I would never have accepted that. I think it's probably that information piece that the listeners could really, regardless of whether you're in a relationship or not, just know a little bit.
knowledge is power, right? So that,
Totally.
if you've got that awareness and you can just have it in the back of your mind, and then, you're going
Mhm.
about things as you would. And then as a
Mhm.
relationship comes about, then, it's time to start potentially actioning some of these conversations to, set
Mhm.
yourself up for a strong future. And ultimately, hopefully, if the relationship is worthwhile, a long and fruitful relationship. So,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
things aren't complicated before kids, or
Yeah.
before marriage, or, whatever
Mhm.
the journey might be.
Mhm.
Now, with assets, so in particular,
Mhm.
on this case, we'll probably just keep it to property, because I suppose that's
Mhm.
probably the most relatable sort of topic. But
Mhm.
with a property settlement in a divorce or separation,
Mhm.
what prep work can be done or put in place before entering into a legal relationship with someone? So I've got a property, I'm in a relationship, but I want to stay in the relationship, and I want, we're going to get married and we're going to have kids and we're going to do all of that. It probably goes back to that prenup, but can you talk to us
Yeah.
more a little bit about the legal side of things?
I think one thing that people assume is that, oh, if the property's in my name, then I get to keep it if we separate, which isn't the case. So if you do really want to isolate and carve off that asset as being yours, then you're back in that prenup space, because at the point in time that you're looking at how to kind of do a property settlement for a couple or a separating couple, you're looking at all of the assets, regardless of whose name they're in, whether it's a jointly owned property or property in someone's sole name. Everything goes into like the pool to then figure out, well, who should get what, or how should this be divided. So I think that's probably the biggest misconception that people have. Oh, if it's in my name, then it remains mine.
Which is crazy, isn't it? Like, you think, yeah, and the devastation that people must feel as well in situations where they've,
Yeah.
saved for a house, they've done the planning, they've done the
Mhm.
research, they've purchased the property, they might have lived in the property, created memories there, and then it's, if it's got my name on it, then I own it. But
Mhm.
really that not actually being the case. That in itself is a huge awareness piece,
Yeah.
that it's just people aren't necessarily focused on or thinking about.
And I think the other kind of big red flag there, which kind of sits on the flip side of that, is it's a fine line between having financial privacy in a relationship as well as accountability. So if you get to a stage where you're splitting up and it turns out that actually your partner has credit cards that you didn't know about and they've just kind of been a little bit financially irresponsible, and actually there's like 10 to 20K worth of debt there, collectively you've got to deal with that in your property settlement. It's really hard. Money, like we know that money is the biggest kind of tension point in relationships. It's hard to talk about, and we therefore don't do it very often. And people can get themselves in a real pickle. And because the balance is having the conversation, but it not being controlling. Like,
Exactly. Yeah, or not to, especially if it is an early relationship, not wanting to maybe not necessarily even reveal what might be happening on your end, but also
yeah,
not
yep,
wanting to, on the flip side of that, not wanting, being proud of what you've got, but also not like making that an attractive thing for the other party. Like it's so complex,
yeah, yeah,
you know.
yeah, yep. And I think that's where, if you're someone who has built some wealth for yourself, talking about prenups can be helpful because it can help to kind of deal with any insecurities of whether that person's just in it for the money or whether they're there because they love or like you. Yeah, that's where I see it come up as well.
Yes, and it goes both ways for men and women. The awareness piece has probably been more on the other side in that, men wanting to protect their
Mhm.
assets and their wealth
Yeah.
before getting into
Mhm.
relationships. But these days, women are hot on their tails and if not exceeding some of the
Yeah.
achievements of their partners and in a,
Mhm.
male-female relationship as an example. But
Yeah.
and having the confidence to speak about it as well and to not feel
Mhm.
like you have to hide your achievements or you have to
Yeah.
hide behind that difficult conversation early because you're only going to have more difficult conversations down the road.
Yeah. And I'd say that, like, let's say a couple is like at the start of their relationship, they're coming with different levels of wealth and they're having those hard conversations. Even if they put a prenup in place at that point in time to isolate the person who's brought the wealth, to kind of leave that with them, and they say, look, anything that we then build together, we share that equally or in whatever way. That couple also needs to kind of keep that framework in mind as they continue on in their relationship. Because let's say they have children, how do they divide the caregiving responsibilities? What does it look like if one person steps out of the workforce or makes certain decisions that means that whilst they're a family unit, costs can be covered and everything's fine, but what does that agreement say if that family unit splits? Keeping that in the back of your mind, because you know what it could look like because you've put on paper. So if you get to a point where life has really changed and you think, oh, I don't think our prenup actually works for us anymore, then having that conversation then while you are still good to think about what you might want it to look like in a different way. Because some people, it's those early days where it's like, oh, look, if we broke up in the first 5 to 10 years, everything that I've brought, like that's mine and it should stay with me. But would you still feel that way if you had 4 or 5 kids together and you've been together for 30 years?
Mm.
Maybe not.
Like a bit of a pulse check, really, on the
Mhm.
like in a healthy way, clearly, like to
Mhm.
just sort of, reassess your situation as you're going on so that, you might
Mhm.
not be in a conversation about separation or divorce. You're just,
Yeah.
just your life has changed. Like you said, you've
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
different assets, different kids, like, whatever that
Mhm.
dynamic
Mhm.
looks like, but to just check in with one another. And so so basically a prenup can be updated over time.
Yeah, you
Right.
can scrap it and do another one whenever you want,
Right.
obviously by agreement,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Or I've seen couples, knowing what their prenup says, they'll choose to acquire new assets together, like in a certain way, So let's say, for example, it says that, so a common kind of structure for a prenup is whatever is in your name is yours, whatever is in my name is mine, and whatever we own jointly, we split according to legal title. So that enables you to hold stuff in your own name, knowing that you'll get to keep it if you split, but also, build wealth together. And I've seen couples kind of put that structure in place, and then, they might have kids or their circumstances might change, and one of them steps out of the workforce. They might then acquire another asset. And even though they've done it together, they choose to put it in one person's name, almost like a security blanket.
Yes.
Like, because you are doing this for our family, I'm going to do this for you if our family were to split. To always make sure that your intentions are reflected in reality.
Yes. And it reminds me also of it's sort of up there with the life insurance chat, which
Yes.
Jake and
Totally.
I had that semi-rule in the last 12 months, so semi-recent, not recently, but that
Yeah.
it felt really strange going to all the
Mhm.
way to the most awful thing that could ever happen, like not just to both of us, but also to our children, discussing what that actually looks like and who gets what. And, it's just that was such an uncomfy process for us to go through, but we knew that we needed to do it as part of our financial plan to, obviously protect things and pass on things to our kids where possible. But yeah, it's you can be in a great relationship but still have to have really yucky, ugly conversations, but you got to do it.
After the life insurance conversation, despite it being yuck, was there a sense of relief? Like, once you've got your structures in place, is there like, oh, I don't have to worry about that now?
Absolutely. It was very much so like a set and forget. Oh, okay, we went to the depths. We don't have to talk about that anymore. Like, let's revisit that again in 10 years' time and do a pulse check then on it. But absolutely, set huge sense of relief and satisfaction. I'm like, done, tick that box. We're all good to, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think talking about money in relationships and whether that looks like prenups or not, I think that's part of it. It's like going to the gym. Like, we don't love working out. I mean, I certainly don't,
Me
but like, you
neither.
do it because it's good for you, and afterwards it feels good. But when you're in the midst of it, like, it feels awful.
Yeah. 100%. You've got no pain, no gain. You've got it,
Yeah.
or short-term pain for long-term gain, rather.
And I think it also, like, if you can have those hard conversations early in a relationship, it's also a really good litmus test. And it brings up red flags early.
Oh, totally. And that's exactly what you want. You want to see what those red flags are, or beige flags, or green flags. There's all sorts of flags now. Figure that stuff out early is the absolute key.
Yeah.
Final question for you, Iveta, and please tell me if this is out of your scope, because I know it bleeds into sort of an accounting sort of structure and setup, but you may have seen this sort of over the top of some of the clients that you've worked with. But when I talk about superannuation, growth and protection for young women, so probably to frame this is obviously, we start in the workforce and we are accruing superannuation, typically through an industry super fund to begin with. When we get our first job, or whoever our employer is with or whatever, you might get to a stage where you go find my super and you put it all together in the one fund. And or you might get to a stage where you have your own self-managed super funds, which again is, it's all of value no matter what the structure is with that super. And then there's a time where some women that end up having children and have time out of the workforce that then sacrifice on super contributions because they're not working, or at the time government hadn't been covering that as part of the government payments, which I know there's been a change there recently. But in terms of super as a topic, what is a way to protect that for young women before or while they're in relationships?
So I think it's important for women to know that superannuation is treated like an asset, like we were talking about real property. What superannuation do you have? It goes in the pool of assets and liabilities that you look at then to figure out who should get what. And the superannuation in particular that has been accrued during the relationship, it should certainly be split to reflect that oftentimes one person, historically, typically the female in a heterosexual relationship, steps out of the workforce for a period of time. So her super balance doesn't continue to grow. And we can split superannuation as part of a property settlement. And it's something that we do commonly do. Then I guess the piece that comes for like a financial advisor is oftentimes women really want to keep the house or real assets. And so they end up trading some of their super, the super that they might be entitled to, for cash now. That can have, I guess, negative implications for them when it hits time to retirement. But again, I sit in the camp of as long as she is aware, she gets to make the choice. Maybe you can't quantify the value of being able to stay in that home for her, and maybe it doesn't make sense on paper. But if that's her choice, that's her choice.
And unfortunately, in the case where it might, something's got to give, right? You can't just have everything. Like if you're dividing,
Yeah.
then you need to sort of firstly pick your battles and, know what's available to you and what's going to be a fair outcome, obviously leaning on the legal professionals that you might be working with. But, if it is something that is sacrificial, less, well, I guess maybe it goes both ways. But, if it is superannuation, then that's something that's going to impact you later on. Is there a way to make that up, or is it just like in the future before you can access your super? Or is it just other than, working?
You could work with like a financial advisor or a financial planner to like really try and target increasing your superannuation balance. To be able to do that, obviously you need to be able to still meet your basic cost of living expenses. But they would be the best kind of professionals to work with around, okay, well, what does $500 in the bank saving now look like versus if I put that $500 in superannuation? And, also the consideration of like, once it's in super, I can't get it out. How does that make me feel versus if I'm still saving the same amount and it's sitting in a bank account that I know I could access if there was a drama? How does that sit with me? And people will have different kind of risk tolerances. I think stereotypically men have higher risk tolerance. And so they might say, yeah, like stick it in super. The numbers make sense and they can handle that feeling of, or that knowledge that, look, something might come up around the corner and I might not have access to the cash, but I'll find a way to make it work if it happens. Whereas people with lower risk kind of tolerances, that just might be unfathomable for them. That would send them into a spin, not having that rainy day fund. And again, I think that's up to the individual.
Yeah, it's a very personal sort of topic, as these all are. These are individualized conversations, before, during, and after relationships that, again, the message is awareness is always the first message, but making sure that you've got the right people on your team, the right professionals in your corner to lean on and get the correct advice on before you go making any big or wild decisions.
And I think if we kind of like then swing back to like new relationships, like being curious about the other person's history with money or their blueprint with money, because money is one of those things that, we have our own lived experience and we just assume that everyone else's is the same. But, one person might grow up having always known that if there was a cost, it would be paid for. And the other person might have grown up not knowing, whether there would be food on the table the next day for financial reasons, which then means that you turn up to things like going out to dinner or choosing which restaurant to go to with all of this baggage that is never identified or spoken about. And it's all related to money.
Exactly. It's a money blueprint. It's funny you said that because I was literally just listening back to a podcast I recorded a few weeks ago about money blueprints. And so hopefully by the time this episode is published, that one will also be published. But I could not agree more. Like everybody has their own money blueprints, like part of your DNA. And, it's what you're exposed to as a child and growing up,
Yeah.
and the influences you have around you. And there's pretty much no way that blueprint is going to be the same as somebody that you end up in a romantic relationship with. I mean,
Yeah.
you might have some similarities, but you uniquely both have your own blueprints. So yeah, exactly right. Knowing what they are and being able to talk about them kind of openly, like, tell me more. That's a valuable and easy place to start.
There's a man by the name of Ramit Sethi, and he has a podcast and a couple of books. His podcast series, I think, is called I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And then he maybe rebranded to Money for Couples.
Yep.
But it's awesome. So you listen to him talk with a couple about money, but he comes from like a financial background as well as, like, I think he's got some training from a psychological background. And being able to be a fly on the wall is a really nice entry point into some of those hard conversations, because you're listening to it and then you start to think like, ooh, I think I might be that person. I love it. Like, from a relationships perspective, there's a woman named Esther Perel who has a podcast series as well as some books. And so she doesn't talk about the money necessarily, but she sits with couples, and you're listening to a couple's counseling session. And again, being able to hear those hard conversations where you're not the topic, so you don't have that defensiveness, but to then hold that curious space and think, oh gosh, I think I might identify with that person. And yeah, I can see where that might be problematic, some of their behaviors or some of their attitudes.
Exactly. Listening to other examples that you could put yourself in the shoes of, but the camera is not pointed at you, so you don't feel like you're in the firing line.
Yeah. You can actually hear, like, that frontal cortex remains active because you haven't gone into that, like, triggered state.
Yeah. Yeah. That's thank you for sharing those resource tips as well. Being able to learn from you as a legal professional and hear your side of things and the different experiences you've worked through with clients is just so valuable, and the resources that you lean on to hear yourself or to perhaps recommend to clients as well. I think that's really, really valuable. So thank you so much for sharing.
Welcome. You are most welcome.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Iveta, for being on the Wing podcast with me. We have worked some really valuable tips and tricks and answers to the burning questions that I've had for years. So thank you so much. Now, for our listeners, Iveta, being the modest, humble human that she is, there is no promotional wrap up to this podcast other than we hope you enjoyed the episode. So, but if you do want to find out more about Iveta, it's Iveta Bales, and you can Google her. But for now, we'll let you get back to your days. And Iveta, thank you again so much for being on the podcast.
You are so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure, anytime. All right. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and follow the Wing Podcast AU, and we will catch you on the next one.